Hey, good morning, Allison. Well, we can tell you that the National Commission on COVID-19 and Criminal Justice looked at crime data from 34 cities across the country, including right here in D.C. Overall, it found that property crimes are down, but more people were killed in 2020 compared to 2019. Now, we can tell you that researchers say that the decline in property crimes seem to be clearly connected to the restrictions imposed during the pandemic. For example, more people are staying at home. That will equate to fewer burglaries because those are more likely to happen while people are not home. On the other hand, the report found that there was a spike in killings and other violent crimes. According to DC police data, there was a 19% increase in homicides between 2019 and 2020 and a slight increase in assaults with a dangerous weapon. Still, DC's numbers were less than some of the other major cities, with the average being about 30% of increases in homicides. Now, researchers say that there may have been a lot of contributing factors to this spike, including the pandemic's impact on policing.
Lots of officers out on quarantine, so we have lower staffing levels. And of the officers who remain on the job, many are subject to social distancing requirements by their agencies or their own discretion to maintain distance between themselves and people on the street. And that reduces the kind of face-to-face interaction that can help to reduce crime. So I think the pandemic did contribute. How much is difficult to say.
Now, researchers also noted a connection to racial equality protests from last summer and the spikes in homicides that we saw across the country that was in these cities, at least, that were studied. Now, while there was not a direct connection to the killing spike, researchers found it was interesting that the timelines coincided with the homicide increases. So, what can we and city leaders take from all of this? Two things. Researchers say leaders should be responding with all hands on deck to this crisis by increasing police responses in areas that are seeing the most impacts. And two, repairing the relationship between police and community. And that's by taking calls for criminal justice reform very seriously. And that can look like holding police more accountable for misconduct and redirecting funds to other agencies and community organizations that are better equipped to help people in the community with non-violent emergencies. Now, there was a lot in this study to take in. If you want to see the whole thing for yourself, you can go over to covid19.council on cj.org.